At the crossroads of diplomacy in danger. Nuclear tensions are rising again as the U.S. and Iran edge closer to a breaking point. Russia and China step into the spotlight. Is this the rebirth of global diplomacy or the countdown to confrontation? Years after the United States walked away from the Iran nuclear deal, diplomacy is once again on life support. But this time, it's not just Tehran and Washington in the arena. Russia and China are stepping in, offering mediation and guarantees. The question, can great power diplomacy rescue an agreement on the verge of collapse? Or are we witnessing the last breaths of Washington's nuclear restraint in the Middle East? Once hailed as a landmark of modern diplomacy, the Iran nuclear deal, formerly known as the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was signed in 2015 with one aim: to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. In exchange, Tehran received relief from crippling international sanctions. But in May 2018, the U.S. President, Donald Trump, in his first term, unilaterally pulled the United States out, accusing Iran of deception. This was a horrible, one-sided deal that should never, ever have been made. The consequences were immediate. U.S. sanctions returned with force. Iran's oil revenues plummeted. Inflation soared. The streets of Tehran erupted in protests. But the Islamic Republic didn't fold. It doubled down, ramping up uranium enrichment, stockpiling advanced centrifuges, and curbing cooperation with international inspectors. Now, Iran, as per reports, has enriched uranium up to 60%, just short of weapons grade.
Weapons grade.
I'm for stopping Iran, very simply, from having a nuclear weapon. They can't have a nuclear weapon. I want Iran to be great and prosperous and terrific. I stopped them once they were broke and they didn't have any money for Hamas. They didn't have any money for Hezbollah. There wouldn't have been an October 7th disaster. They were broke. They had no money, and they weren't spending it to terrorist organizations because they had none. When Biden came in, he took all the sanctions off. China wasn't allowed to buy. I said, if you buy, because they're their biggest customer, I said, you buy 1 barrel of oil, just 1 barrel of oil from Iran, and you can't do business in the United States. And by the way, we have nice conversations going with China just to intercede, you know. It's like really very good.
Once again, a familiar shadow returns to the negotiating table, but this time not as a participant. Russia and China now position themselves as mediators between Iran and the United States. On April 18th, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Moscow. Tehran, preparing for a second round of nuclear talks with Washington, sought Russian backing for that variant. That I have kept Mr. Lavrov informed of the nature of these discussions and about the issues that have been raised during these discussions with the Americans. We were very satisfied with the role that Russia played in getting the JCPOA implemented. The Russian role was a very useful and an important role that was played in this past agreement by our Russian friends, that we are hopeful and expect that in any future agreement, Russia will continue its helpful role. And I'm very happy that today Mr. Lavrov gave me such an assurance. For Iran, Moscow is not just a diplomatic partner, it's a strategic ally. From arms deals to nuclear infrastructure, Russia has invested deeply in Tehran. Iraqi's tone was optimistic. Lavrov's response measured, but clear. From my good initiative, we are ready to help and mediate, to play any role that will be helpful from the Iranian point of view and acceptable for the United States. We proceed from the fact that the only way to get an agreement as the minister has just said, is to agree exclusively on nuclear issues. Russia is not alone. China also maintains deep economic ties with Iran, including a sweeping 25-year cooperation agreement worth billions. Beijing has remained vocally supportive of reviving the JCPOA while criticizing U.S. sanctions. In this high-stakes diplomatic poker game, Moscow and Beijing aren't just mediators, they're stakeholders. During the negotiations between Tehran and Washington, guarantees will not only be provided by the U.S., countries such as Russia and China will enter into negotiations with the United States on more reliable guarantees. But the Beijing talks on March 14th, the three nations reaffirmed their commitment to non-proliferation and jointly condemned sanctions, pressure, or the threat of force. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, as per South China Morning Post, also proposed a five-point plan for the settlement of the Iranian nuclear issue that included a commitment to the JCPOA nuclear deal that President Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of during his first term, while Oman hosted the first round of talks on April 12th. Hopes now rest on Rome, where U.S. and Iranian delegations are due for a second meeting on April 19th. But with mistrust high and stakes even higher, optimism remains thin as tensions rise and the clock ticks. Tehran is signaling a willingness to compromise on its uranium enrichment in exchange for a crucial promise: strong guarantees that the United States will not walk away from another deal. But Tehran insists that its centrifuge cages remain intact, emphasizing that any agreement must respect their right to enrich uranium. Tehran's red lines, mandated by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, could not be compromised in the talks, an official told Reuters, describing Iran's negotiating position on condition of anonymity. He said those red lines meant Iran would never agree to dismantle its centrifuges for enriching uranium, halt enrichment altogether, or reduce the amount of enriched uranium it stores to a level below the level it agreed in the 2015 deal that Trump abandoned. Yet, despite Iran's willingness to move forward, President Trump remains unwavering in his demand. With Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. And if they have a nuclear weapon, you'll be very unhappy. You'll be very unhappy because your life will be in great danger in Oman. Both sides took tentative steps toward common ground with Iran, suggesting Washington's willingness to allow some nuclear activities could provide an opening. However, U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff's opposition has shifted, initially open to limiting Iran's program. He now insists on the complete cessation of enrichment. Iran, ever strategic, has proposed a three-stage deal: cap enrichment at the 2015 levels in exchange for sanctions relief. There's a flicker of hope in this offer, with Witkoff signaling some optimism as the second round of talks looms. But with trust in short supply, the path to a lasting deal is anything but guaranteed that Iran's uranium continues to spin. The clock continues to tick, and in the shadows of great power rivalry, the world faces a familiar question. Can diplomacy pull the world back from the brink? A revived deal could stabilize the Middle East, relieve sanctions, and open a new chapter in U.S.-Iran relations. But failure could mean military escalation, regional war, or a nuclear-armed Iran. The Tehran's tilt toward multilateral diplomacy over Washington's more transactional bilateral approach signals a strategic recalibration amid rising tensions. But that alignment could risk triggering an even tougher backlash from the United States. Analysts believe Trump must be upset with Russia and China's strategic support for Iran. It is highly possible that Trump will impose some extra pressure on Tehran in the near future. For now, the future of the Iran nuclear deal lies not just in Washington or Tehran, but in Moscow, Beijing, and a fragile negotiating table in Rome.